Hi and good morning. This is Mick Furlong here, Managing Partner at the Grey Matters Network. We provide experienced professionals to many organisations across Ireland in operational, project and advisory roles. This is one of our podcasts, another in the Ask the Expert series, all available on our website. And today's theme is governance. And joining us here is one of our associates, Donal Courtney, to give us his view and share his experiences. Donal has operated as a non-exec director for the last 10 years across a number of regulated institutions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Donal, who will briefly introduce himself and then take a number of questions. So you want to just say hi, Donal, and then I'll start the barrage of questions.
Michael, many thanks for that introduction. Yes, I've been operating now for the last 10 years across a number of institutions, primarily on the regulated financial services side as an independent non-exec director. Looking forward to sharing my thoughts with you.
Okay, great. So firstly, Donal, there is and has been a lot of talk about corporate governance. And in a few words, how would you best describe what is meant by corporate governance?
Michael, governance can mean many things to many people, but clearly there's a range of differing entities, from regulated financial institutions to publicly quoted companies subject to various corporate governance regulations, to smaller owner-managed businesses, to charities and to various sporting entities. And clearly, over the last few years, we've had many examples of corporate failures, financial scandals, fines that emanate from all of these sectors. So for me, there's a number of key topics that I see as critical to embedding a strong corporate governance structure within any of these entities we've just mentioned there. But I do believe that some key governance principles hold true across the spectrum of all of these organisation types. So in summary, I would say corporate governance looks good for me, reflected in strong leadership from a board and senior management, in a well-controlled organisation that understands the risks to its business model, that has a real customer focus, and that has effective systems and controls in place to manage that business.
Okay. And in your experience as an executive and a non-exec director, what would you see as some of the key characteristics of good corporate governance?
Well, so let's start by understanding, as I just mentioned, that corporate governance structures vary according to the size and status of the company that we're speaking about. But in general, if we assume that we've got a board of directors and a senior management team involved, we may or may not have independent directors, and that's something obviously we can come back to. But I think there's probably 4 or 5 key areas of governance that I'd like to chat about. The first one of those is around strategy and risk. For me, all organizations, large or small, should have a process in place to set out not just their strategy in terms of products, markets, etc., but also around the risks that they see as key to managing in order to achieve the stated strategy. Regular reporting on risks and risk mitigation planning is key in order for boards and senior management teams to understand where the entity sits with regards to managing the risks. And I firmly believe that the board must drive this strategic and risk review with the obvious assistance of the CEO and executive team. The next key area for me is around the system of internal controls within any organization. All entities have risks. The key risk of financial loss arising from internal or external fraud or selling to entities where they fail to pay. These can be potentially avoided by robust internal control processes. So let's look at an example of email fraud, which has now become very prevalent. Typically, this arises when an entity's email system is compromised and individuals within an entity, let's say, receive an email from a known supplier name asking them to change their bank account details for future payments. Many entities have been caught out and paid monies to bank accounts they thought belonged to genuine suppliers, only to find out that at a cost that the payments were actually to fraudsters. So if the entity has a process communicated that any request to change bank accounts for supplier payments must be validated by a callback to the supplier involved, this should stop such fraudulent events happening. That was one example. So in summary, for me, strong financial controls across any organization are key to mitigating financial risk. And it's important that these controls are tested regularly to ensure that they're working. This also plays into our awareness raised cybersecurity and how best we can ensure that the organization is protected. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Another key governance topic for me is the timely availability and quality of the data used for decision-making purposes. Obviously, the size of any financial investment in systems is going to depend upon the size of the organization, but the fundamental requirement for good quality data that is delivered to senior management teams and boards is the same for all entities. Information systems need to be controlled and managed within the cost envelope, obviously available to any organization. So it's important to purchase or build the information systems that are best suited for your needs and finances and that concentrate on the key data required to manage your business. Michael, I don't think we can talk about governance without referring to the key topic of customers of any entity. At its simplest, any entity should have a focus on its customers. Are they happy with products? How are we handling complaints? Are we responsive to customers? Are we learning from their feedback? All of this goes to our longer term strategy, and indeed for regulated financial services firms, customer conduct is a key regulatory topic and focus now. The next governance topic for me would be around people, succession planning, and the development of our key people assets at board and senior management level is a key success factor in any organizations. Interestingly, our employees are our biggest asset, but you won't find them on any balance sheet. However, in order for any organization to be successful and grow, it's imperative that the board looks at the business and its future strategy and its required resources in terms of skill sets and diversity of thought, gender, age, background, ethnicity, etc. In order to move forward, let's make sure that we have the right people in the right seats on the bus. So succession planning should be right at the top of any board agenda, and this should also include the training and development of our key people assets.
Great, it's very insightful, Donal. And in terms of what do you see as some of the key challenges and emerging trends in the area of corporate governance at the moment?
So I'm going to chat about four, Michael. One would be around increased regulation. The second would be around cyber. Third one around outsourcing. And then finally, remote working, which we're all dealing with at the moment. So if we look at regulation, there is no doubt that across the business spectrum, regulation is ever increasing. The expectations on entities and individuals to comply and report on regulatory matters is occupying a significant amount of board and senior management time, as is the investment in systems capable of delivering high quality data in a timely and efficient manner. I don't see this trend stopping anytime soon. And for those involved in financial regulated businesses, the impact of the impending introduction of the senior executive accountability regime could be very significant. In relation to cybersecurity, it's now firmly on the agenda of boards and companies as they look to protect themselves from attacks that could significantly impact their business. As we discussed earlier, this is a key risk to any business strategy and requires in-depth analysis and remediation actions to protect the business. In relation to outsourcing arrangements, many companies now outsource, and that creates risk. We need to know what is outsourced to who, how are the arrangements managed, is there comprehensive service level agreements in place, and we need regular reporting. The objective being to ensure that we get the best value and delivery, and that we understand when we don't, and that we're in a position to adapt and change. And lastly, in relation to remote working, obviously we're all dealing with this in relation to COVID-19. Clearly it's worked for many companies and many will look to continue with it, but it's important to understand that there are risks associated with remote working around financial control, in relation to leadership challenges, in relation to development and training of new employees. So there's no doubt that risk management or that remote working is a risk which needs to be monitored carefully while fully understanding that there are benefits.
Okay, and you've covered an awful lot in terms of governance from your perspective. So what value could a Grey Matters Network practitioner be to organizations looking at governance?
So, I mean, obviously, Michael, we can see the topic of governance is very broad and it covers many topics. But my advice to organizations would be to look at the overall governance structures that they have and focus on the key elements that they feel need strengthening. Not everything needs to be changed, but if you look at board and committee structures and how they're operating, you look at how people and you're managing your development of your people, your finance and reporting, the IT challenges that you have, your risk identification processes. How are we dealing with cyber? How are we dealing with outsourcing? How are we dealing with remote working? And that's just to mention a few. So I think that we have within the Grey Matters Network a menu of very experienced practitioners, all of whom can assess the organization's requirements in relation to the topics we mentioned, set out streamlined plans to improve existing processes and to ensure that they fit within an organization's plan to improve their overall governance within the entity. Michael, that's my whistle-stop tour of some of my thoughts on the sometimes thorny subject of governance.
Brilliant. And that's very, very valuable commentary, Donal, and great to hear from somebody who has that level of experience. So in terms of some of the takeaways, I suppose, from a governance perspective, the fact that strategy and risk fundamental in terms of governance, internal controls, having the right internal controls in place, and the availability of data and making sure you're leveraging that data. And at the end of the day, you can never forget the customer focus and the value of having that customer focus. And if your governance systems are supporting that, all the better. And the last point you made, which is by no means least, people succession planning and development of key people assets, particularly at a time when it's so difficult to get the right people. So once again, thank you very much, Donal. Very insightful and very valuable. And I would just suggest for those looking at this podcast, keep an eye out on our LinkedIn page. You'll see on our website, as I said, we have had a number of other podcasts that I think will be quite valuable in terms of Ask the Expert. One in terms of organizational effectiveness, digital transformation, and business continuity. So, as I said, thank you very much for your time and for listening. And I look forward to speaking to you again on our next Ask the Expert podcast. Thank you very much.